Welcome to the third video of Unit 9. In this video, we are going to cover the Crusades. Before we get to the Crusades, we're going to talk about what the Christian church looked like in Europe prior to the leading to the Crusades. So reforms to the Christian church. Many monasteries were destroyed or weakened because of Viking raids. So we're in Europe here. Remember these Germanic invasions. They're going to talk about monasteries as well. Feudalism weakened the power of the Central Catholic Church because more power was in the hands of the noblemen. So the noblemen really got to control what the people could do and where they could go and really everything about their lives. Some priests got married and had children, even though this was against Roman Catholicism. Remember those differences originally in the split in the church. Some bishops sold positions to unqualified people, a practice called simony. Kings appointed church officials rather than the church itself. So there were several things that people were doing in association with the church that went against the original ideals of the Catholic Church. Religious orders, led by Benedictine monks, opened new monasteries which strictly enforced church rules and became a model that the church followed to make reforms. So this really occurred in the late 1000s. It's an idea of spiritual revival, the return to the basic principles that guide Christianity. Popes Leo IX and Gregory VII expanded the power of the church and eliminated many corrupt practices. Simony is the buying and selling of pardons or benefits with the church. And so these are ideas of corrupt practices that several of the popes of the Catholic faith are going to really try and eliminate. The Catholic Church began to be run more like a kingdom. The Pope would be the head. There were Pope's advisors, and there was a court, that there was law involved, canon law, which dealt with marriage and divorce and inheritance. People would pay, they would send diplomats to negotiate with foreign kingdoms. They collected a tax called a tithe. People would pay 1/10 of their yearly income to the church. They would issue calls for war. Most hospitals were operated by the church in this time. So they were run kind of like a kingdom at this point. Larger cities built cathedrals to show the power of Christianity. These cathedrals would be the largest building in the city, located in the center of the city, and it would provide jobs for the lower classes. They would help build it, and tax money would also be used to help build these cathedrals. Cathedrals were built in the Gothic style. Gothic style buildings have the following features. We're going to go through the different features. First, they have stained glass windows. These stained glass windows showed Bible stories. If you never knew why stained glass windows held these Bible stories visually, it's because at this point in Europe, most of the population is illiterate, meaning they cannot read or write. So they cannot read the different stories. And so these stained glass windows would be a way to represent visually the stories that are being told in church, the different religious stories. Church ceilings had vaulted ceilings, which allowed for very large interior spaces. So this is another attribute or quality of the Gothic style. Third, cathedrals' basic layout was cross-shaped. There would be other rooms that were added on, but you can see here the basic shape is a cross shape. Fourth, flying buttresses helped keep the weight of the roof from collapsing. So these here would be the buttresses, and they would help distribute the weight so that all of this would not collapse down into the cathedral. The reforms to the church practices, increases in the church power, and revitalization of churches' construction began a period known as the Age of Faith, where the Catholic Church was at its peak of power. And that takes us into the Crusades. So the Crusades are going to occur at the same time we see Islam having already spread through northern Africa into Spain. So by the late 1000s, Muslims were threatening to push into more Christian territory, especially the Byzantine Empire. So Islam was spreading, and the Byzantine Empire, located here, with Constantinople here, was fearful. They were followers of Catholicism, and they were fearful that the Muslim armies were going to invade, and that would mean that Christianity would fall and Islam would really spread into this region. That was the Byzantine Empire. So the Byzantine emperor in 1093 is going to request help from the Pope in fighting against these Muslim armies, the Muslim Turks. In 1096, Pope Urban II issued a call for the Christian kingdoms of Europe to send troops in a crusade against the Muslims. Crusade means a holy war, going to war for a religious or holy purpose. And so the Pope is going to call for those people in Europe, for all Christians in Europe, to be willing to take up arms against the Muslims to help protect this area. So this would be an excerpt from the speech that Pope Urban II gave, which calls on people of all ranks, so not just serfs, but also knights and kings and noblemen, to help the Christians and fight against the Muslims. According to Pope Urban II, if a soldier died while on a crusade, they were supposed to automatically go to heaven. In 1096, somewhere between 50 and 60,000 knights became crusaders. Red crosses were sewn onto tunics over their armor, which you can see here would be an example of that. And they had a battle cry of "God wills it" when they went into battle. Pope Urban's demand for crusade was responded to by 50 to 60,000 men of all social classes. Many people were motivated by religion, poor people were forced by their local lords, and knights and nobles were looking for a chance to earn wealth or land. So again, we see the symbol of the cross. There are many different crusades that are undertaken. We're going to talk about the first four major crusades. So the first crusade occurred between 1096 and 1099 CE or AD, and it was designed to recapture Jerusalem and the Holy Land from the Muslims. So Muslim armies were going to control northern Africa. This over here would be the Arabian Peninsula. And so this green is where Islam can be found. Roman Catholic Church controls the areas up here, and we see some Greek Orthodox areas here as well. So the first crusade is going to be the fight for Jerusalem, located here. The crusade was poorly organized, but eventually did succeed in capturing Jerusalem. The Christians captured Jerusalem in 1099. Christians then set up kingdoms called the Crusader states in the Holy Land. Each was ruled by a European nobleman. So we have Jerusalem here, and so each of these different colors represents a different kingdom that a European nobleman took over. So rather than moving in, taking Jerusalem, and then everybody leaving, a lot of individuals settled here and maintained the land for the Christians. The Second Crusade. In the Second Crusade, Muslims counterattacked or attacked back and retook much of their territory, including Jerusalem. So this is prior to or before the Second Crusade. Muslims are going to take back this land in 1187, which takes us to the Second Crusade. The Crusades refer to the actions taken by the Christians on these holy wars. Muslim troops were led by the great commander Saladin. Because of his skill and generous treatment of defeated enemies, he earned respect from both Muslims and Christians. The Second Crusade failed to recapture Christian territory. So the Second Crusade, Christians attempted to take back Jerusalem and the area surrounding it, and they failed. Which takes us to the Third Crusade. Christians, led by King Richard the Lionhearted of England, were determined to recapture Jerusalem yet again. Richard the Lionhearted and Saladin, who led the Muslim armies, fought many battles against each other and ended up signing a treaty. This treaty stated that Muslims were allowed to keep Jerusalem, but Christian pilgrims could visit the Holy Land as they wished, so they could come and go as they pleased. The Fourth Crusade was one final attempt to recapture Jerusalem in 1198, one final major attempt. Even after the treaty was signed, Christian crusaders got involved in Byzantine politics, ended up attacking and looting Constantinople in 1204, and so this Fourth Crusade was also not successful. The looting of Constantinople furthered the split between Eastern Orthodox and Western Catholic Christian churches, which we already know had split from the Great Schism. The looting of Constantinople in 1204 and 100 years of constant fighting against the Turks weakened the Byzantine Empire even further. Several smaller crusades were organized by individual kings in the 1200s, but none succeeded in creating any long-standing changes in the territory in the Middle East. So we'll go through some of the negative and some of the positive impacts of the Crusades. So negative impacts: Constantinople was eventually captured by the Turks in 1453. So for the Byzantine Empire, this marked the end. Constantinople was renamed Istanbul and became the capital of the Muslim Ottoman Empire. Unsuccessful crusades weakened the power and authority of the Pope and increased the power of European kings like Richard. Richard, who was willing to lead people into battle in these crusades. The death of many nobles and knights in battle weakened feudalism in Europe because there was a lack of protection there. And increased hostility between Christian, Muslim, and Jewish groups was established, continued, and unfortunately, in some places, it still lasts today. On the positive side, one of the positive impacts was that Christians were exposed to scholarly works created by Muslim scholars and Greek and Roman records they preserved. So we've talked about some of those achievements of the Islamic Empire. Those are going to spread to Europe as people see the things as they enter this new land controlled by Muslims. They're going to see things that have been created by Muslims, and they're going to take the ideas back with them. So Christians brought back many technological and cultural advances which helped Europe advance, including the compass, the astrolabe, the Latin sail, and Arabic numerals. Europeans were exposed to Asian trade goods, which stimulated the creation of new trade routes. So we'll see the rise of trade following the Crusades. And cities in northern Italy grew as both centers of trade routes and banking centers, which is going to help contribute to the rise of the Renaissance. Eventually, the desire to gain Asian trade goods, combined with the newly acquired technology and knowledge, caused Europeans to begin the age of exploration. So the spreading of European cultures into the Americas. Originally not the intent, but that's what ended up happening. And that you will cover, the age of exploration, you will cover next year in world history too. In our next video, we'll talk more about the Renaissance.